This is all your fault. You know how I get when you talk to me like that. I asked you what time you'd be home.
I didn't do anything. You said it in that tone.
There's always a tone with you, Corinna. You know what you do.
I haven't said anything wrong.
Corinna was standing in the kitchen doorway of their Portland apartment. Her left cheek was warm in the way that meant it would show by morning. She had learned the difference between the kinds that showed and the kinds that didn't. She had been learning things like that for 2 years. He ran his hand through his hair. He looked, and this was the part that broke her every single time, genuinely distressed. Like he was the one who had been hurt, like the whole thing had happened to him. "I'm sorry," he said. "You know I hate this. You know I hate when it gets to this." She looked at him, at this man she had loved since she was 24, who had proposed in the rain 6 months ago, who could be the warmest person in any room, who had just hit her and was now, within 3 minutes, standing in their kitchen looking like the victim of the thing he had done. This is the story of Corinna, and how she finally, on an ordinary Thursday night in Portland, understood the pattern she had been living inside. This is Breakup Diaries, and this one matters. The worst part was never the hit. She would understand this later in her mother Ruth's spare room, door locked, cup of tea she couldn't drink. The worst part was the apology, because the apology was the reason she stayed, every single time. The apology was the evidence she used to build the case that he was a good person who had a problem rather than the truth, a man who had found that hitting her and then crying about it was a system, and the system worked. If you're just finding this story, welcome to Breakup Diaries. Previously, we opened in the middle of a cycle that had been running for nearly 2 years. Today, we go back to the beginning, because the beginning is the part that makes the middle make sense, and the beginning was beautiful. Corinna met Fletcher at a work event in Portland. He was a contractor, she was in communications, and he spent 40 minutes talking only to her as though the rest of the room did not exist. He remembered her coffee order by their second date. He texted good morning before she was awake. He called her the most interesting person he had met in years. It felt like being chosen. Specifically, deliberately chosen. Corinna had never felt that before, and she did not recognize it for what it partly was. A man who needed someone completely focused on him and had learned that intensity was the fastest route to that. The first red flag was 6 months in. He called 3 times during a work dinner she had told him about. When she came home, he was quiet in a way that filled the apartment. She asked if he was okay. He said, "I just missed you." She found it touching. She told Nadia the next day. Nadia said, "That's a lot of calls." Corinna said Nadia didn't understand how much he felt things. The first time he grabbed her arm too hard was month 9. Not a hit. Just a grip mid-argument, fingers pressing in. He apologized immediately. He looked horrified at himself. She believed the horror completely. She had no template for what came after a grip that left marks. She was about to get one. Have you ever looked back at a relationship and realized the red flags were there from the start, just wrapped in something that looked like love? Drop your answer below. Because what happens next is the part hardest to explain to people who haven't lived it. Subscribe, this story gets harder before it gets honest. The cycle had a shape. Corinna would understand this later, would read about it online at 2 in the morning, shaking slightly, recognizing every phase with the specific nausea of seeing your own life described in a clinical list written for strangers. But while she was inside it, it did not have a shape. It just had a texture, like weather, like something that happened to you rather than something with a pattern you could map. An argument would build always over something small. A question in the wrong tone, dinner that was late. A conversation at a party where she laughed at someone else's joke. Then the hit, always where it didn't show in the beginning. Then he would cry. Then the apology, genuine, complete with the devastation of a man who appeared to hate himself. Then roses. Then 2 weeks of the best version of him she had ever seen. Then it would happen again. The public humiliation came on a Saturday in October. They were at a friend's birthday dinner, 12 people, long table, wine, when Corinna laughed too long at something the man beside her said. Fletcher went cold across the table. She felt it immediately. She spent the rest of dinner managing the atmosphere, redirecting conversations, being careful. On the way to the car, he called her a name loud enough for the couple walking behind them to hear. She saw them look. She smiled at Fletcher like nothing had happened. She would spend 2 days wishing she hadn't smiled. Nadia called the next morning. "I saw his face at that table," she said. "Corinna, I need you to hear me." Corinna told Nadia she was fine. Nadia did not give up. She kept calling. She watched Corinna shrink, stop wearing certain colors because Fletcher had an opinion, stop seeing certain friends because Fletcher found reasons to be hurt by them. She watched a woman she had known for 11 years become quieter and smaller and more careful. She filed every observation away, waiting for the day Corinna was ready to hear what she had been trying to say. Corinna's mother Ruth had never fully liked Fletcher. She expressed discomfort through a specific kind of careful politeness that Corinna had grown up reading like a second language. She had said nothing directly until the Sunday dinner where she finally saw what Corinna had been managing alone. It was nothing dramatic by the standards of what had happened behind closed doors. Corinna made a small error. She forgot Fletcher had mentioned he didn't want the television on during dinner, and she turned it on out of habit. He reached across and clicked it off. Then he looked at her and said in a low, measured voice, "We talked about this." 2 words, low, measured, not a shout. Just the tone, the specific tone that Corinna had spent 2 years learning to navigate and the way her body responded. She went immediately still, immediately apologetic, immediately smaller. She looked up. Her mother was watching her. Not watching Fletcher, watching Corinna. Watching the way her daughter's body had moved in response to a man's tone at a dinner table. Ruth's face was completely neutral, the careful neutral of a woman controlling her own reaction. And behind the neutral was something Corinna had never seen on her mother's face directed at her before. Terror. For the first time in 2 years, Corinna saw herself from the outside, through the eyes of a woman who had raised her and was now watching what had become of her. She excused herself to use the bathroom, sat on the edge of the tub for 11 minutes. When she came back, Fletcher was laughing at something Ruth had said. Ruth was smiling. Her eyes were not. Ruth called the following Tuesday. She said, "Corinna, I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me honestly." Corinna already knew the question. She had been waiting for it since the bathroom floor. She sat down in the kitchen with her back against the cabinet, the same cabinet she stood against steadying her voice after arguments, and said, "Yes, Mum," before Ruth had finished asking. Just yes. She had never said it out loud before. The word felt enormous. It also felt, for the first time, like the beginning of something. She did not leave dramatically. There was no final argument, no grand speech, no scene that looked like a film. She left on a Wednesday afternoon while Fletcher was at a site visit. 2 bags, her laptop, and the small wooden box her grandmother left her that she had never once let him move from the windowsill. She drove to Ruth's. Ruth opened the door and stepped back without a word, put the kettle on, and sat across from her daughter without asking her to explain anything she wasn't ready to explain. The messages from Fletcher started within 2 hours. First, "Where are you?" Then, "I know you're upset, we can talk about this." Then 20 minutes of silence. Then, "You're being dramatic, you know how you get." Then, "I can't believe you'd do this to me." Then the calls, then the voicemails. Then the one Corinna played for Nadia 3 days later, hands steady for the first time in months, where his voice broke and he said, "You are the only person who has ever understood me. Please come home. I will get help. I promise this time I will get help." Nadia listened to the whole thing. She looked at Corinna. She said, "How many times has he promised to get help?" Corinna thought about it seriously. 4, she said. Nadia nodded. She said nothing else. She didn't need to. The number did the work. Corinna did not go back. Fletcher showed up at Ruth's house 3 days later with flowers. Ruth answered the door. 5'3", 61 years old, and she looked at this man with flowers and said in a voice Corinna hadn't heard since she was a teenager, "You need to leave right now, and if you come back I will call the police before I open the door." Fletcher left. Corinna, watching from the upstairs window, felt something she had not felt in 2 years. Safe. The first thing Corinna noticed in the weeks after she left was the quiet. Not silence, Ruth's house was not silent, but the specific quiet of a space where nothing was about to happen, where she did not need to monitor the temperature of another person's mood. She had not realized, until it was gone, how much energy she had been spending on that monitoring. It had become so constant she had stopped feeling it, like background noise you only hear when it stops. She started therapy 6 weeks after leaving. Her therapist used a phrase in their 3rd session that Corinna wrote in her journal and read back to herself for months. You did not fall in love with a dangerous person. You fell in love with the safe version he showed you until you were too invested to leave easily. That is not a failure of your judgment. That is how the pattern works. She went back to wearing the colors she liked. She called the friends she had quietly stopped seeing. She started running again, something Fletcher had once suggested she did to impress other men, in the particular way he had of making ordinary things feel like accusations. Fletcher sent one final message 8 months after she left. I hope you know what you threw away. She read it once, showed it to Nadia, who laughed in the way that meant, of course he did. Corinna laughed too. Then she blocked his number, put her phone down, and went back to the conversation she had been in the middle of. She did not look back, not because it didn't hurt, because she finally understood that looking back was the only thing he had left to offer her. Why do people stay? Not judgment, genuine understanding. Because the answer matters more than most people realize. Drop it below. And if any part of Corinna's story sounds familiar, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours. No judgment. This is Breakup Diaries. See you in the next one.